A lot of this spending, it's so massive. There's not a clear winner. Reminds you a little bit of early internet, right? Like there were 20 companies and then there were two.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Thompson, CEO of The Atlantic, and this is my podcast, The Most Interesting Thing in AI. It's produced by the business side of The Atlantic and thus independent of The Atlantic's editorial staff. Thanks to our supporting sponsor, PwC, a leader in helping organizations use AI. If you were an investor in 2000 and you wanted to bet on the future of technology, you might have put money into the largest tech firms of the day, companies like Cisco, Intel, Nokia, AOL, and you would have bet wrong. In the last quarter century, all those stocks have lagged behind the market. They've been displaced by players who didn't exist or barely existed back then. Business of tech is therefore notoriously difficult to predict. All that unpredictability has made for some great drama. The last 25 years, the tech industry have seen wild characters, overnight success, and tragic failures. Through all of it, there's been Kara Swisher. She's been covering everything from the AOL-Time Warner merger of 2000 to the rise of Elon Musk to the shakeup at OpenAI that briefly ousted Sam Altman. She has a remarkable knack for seeing where media is heading. She's at the forefront of live event reporting, first at the Wall Street Journal and then at Recode with the Code Conference. Today, she's the host of about 15,000 different podcasts covering business and tech, and she's got a show on CNN about the science of longevity, an industry popular with the people running these AI companies. She knows many of them personally. She has a unique perspective from watching them and the tech industry itself change immensely. Naturally, she has lots of thoughts on AI, what Silicon Valley is getting right, wrong, and what might come next. Here's my conversation with Kara Swisher. Kara Swisher, welcome to The Most Interesting Thing in AI.
Well, thank you for being here in this Maine town.
It's kind of wonderful to be here with you.
It is. I feel like I'm on the Today Show, except not New York.
Except we're across from the Bar Harbor Hannafords.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right.
It's a little less than Rockefeller Center, but we are right near Acadia National Park. I want to talk to you about some of the big questions in AI, particularly the ones about AI in the future. I want to start with your optimism about tech. Mm-hmm. You, like me, became a tech journalist because you loved it. You wrote subtitle of your book is A Love Story. Mm-hmm. So tell me something in the last 6 months in AI where you felt that love, Kara?
Love, not a lot actually, but recently we're kind of in a weird period, I think, of where it's developing, where there's a real backlash to it that's probably too much, but the front lash was too much, right? And then the control of the big tech companies is really still remains disturbing on lots of levels. And then all manner of grift happening in the Trump administration around this topic and the people involved. So there's been a lot of negatives. But one of the things I did while I was looking at all this was a lot of interviews with medical people around not just, the marketing nonsense from Sam Altman or Dario Modi or any of them, where we're going to solve cancer. Like they make these big, long statements, which I think is all marketing essentially. But I've interviewed, Jennifer Doudna of CRISPR. I've interviewed the guy who's working on the mRNA pancreas vaccines and everything else. And tech and AI are a critical part of it. And I think that you start to really think about all the strides we could make in certain diseases, like that is very encouraging if we get enough funding from the government, if this government doesn't stop denying funding for basic research and things like that. And so I visited labs at University of Pennsylvania, for example, where they're working on it, and AI is critical to all of it, all of it. It moves drug discovery faster. It solves problems quicker. When it's used as a tool and applied by humans who are doing the thinking, it's fantastic.
It's super interesting because it moves some steps in the process of getting a drug and solving a problem much faster. It's like a vehicle that drives you from A to B at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Then you have to go from B to C at 1 mile an hour.
Or figuring things out that humans would have figured out, like the stuff around, for example, the shingles vaccine and dementia. These were things that humans would have figured out eventually. And I think one of the things that it just speeds up certain things that need speeding, just like a lot, like electricity might have sped up.
I really like the potential to, you'll never be able to really test a drug in a computer, but if you can simulate a human body in a relatively accurate way, you can save a bunch of steps and go through a whole bunch of things to move really useful drugs further along.
And there's not one person that doesn't say that in the medical profession. I mean, they have a lot of other gripes that are happening now in basic research, but in that regard, it's really exciting. And some of the technological things are in media are interesting. Like some of them, not all of them, but some of them.
Some are amazing.
Some are amazing.
It's an incredible time to be a journalist.
Right, exactly. You can use it for a lot of things. And like analysis is actually getting better and better. Like one of the things is I have a lawyer friend that's been helping me figure out this Paramount deal and put in a bunch of stuff, but his prompts were critical to how it was done. It wasn't the AI that was doing it. It was him using it as a tool. And we're getting some great analysis that's I probably could have gotten from someone, but it was actually helpful. And so you can see all manner of help as long as it's in a helpful mode with human centered. And I think the greatest thing I've seen recently is the Pope's encyclical about magnificent humanity, which I think was the smartest take on where AI should go. It was not anti-tech.
How did you feel about Anthropic being there at the launch? Because I loved
just
the
one
encyclical.
guy was. Just one guy.
But it was a little, I loved the encyclical. It was my favorite thing I read on AI. And both popes, popes are crushing it on AI.
Early
They've
Pope,
been fantastic.
Pre-Pope, this Pope was very pushing a lot of this
It did
stuff.
feel weird, though, to have one of the big frontier companies or a representative
Well,
there
it's one
at
of
the
the
announcement.
founders, I don't know. It's sort of like having, Craig Newmark at something. Like, he's, they're like, they have other interests. And I think this is a person who hasn't been as involved at Anthropic as Dario has, right? There's a lot of founders that move off in that direction, Wozniak and things like that. And so I was fine with that. I think human-centered AI, which of course many have talked about. Fei Li, for example, wrote a whole book last year about
Started
this.
a whole institute.
Yes, started the whole institute, and also was one of the very early AI people. Jeff Hinton talks about. There's been a lot of voices on this, but I thought the Pope really did a thoughtful encyclical, aided by a lot of different people, but it was both tech forward and also hold on a second about wealth and everything else.
I want to go back to something interesting you said a minute ago, where you said the backlash probably has gone a little too far. Explain that.
Well, these data center backlashes, it's a proxy for the anger. It's a proxy for anger towards billionaires. It's a proxy for anger towards people, billionaires getting all the juicy bits from the Trump administration. It's a proxy for Jeff Bezos' Venice wedding. It's all grotesque. And it's definitely a proxy for Elon Musk and his behavior around Doge and everything else he did, right, essentially. And I think people, more than that, it feels like the fix is in. And so you have these data centers come in, whether it's Elon in Memphis just throwing up these gas-powered engines to get this stuff done, whether it's Kevin O'Leary going to Utah and calling them Chinese communists if they're not down with his plans for this massive thing. And I think it's the way a lot of people have gone in has been without the clear signals to the communities. What's this good for me? Is it just another baseball stadium that I don't get anything out of? Why am I giving up electrical power? Why am I having higher prices? And in some cases, I'm going to do this interview next week with a mayor in Michigan who put together a great deal for the community. And the people came in and were so against it, even if it was a great deal, they didn't want to do it. And to me, that's a signal of, what if you get a great deal and it's good for the community? You won't even do it because the anger.
Are you pro data centers in the U.S.?
No. Maybe, yes. Maybe. It's like, am I pro anything? It depends on how it's done, and if it's done in a way that doesn't have, the fix is in, that Facebook comes into Louisiana and gets whatever it wants without the locals knowing, or going, if they came in and said, we'll be paying your property taxes 10 years in advance, we're going to be doing all the electrical ourselves, we're going to be employing this many people guaranteed, that kind of stuff. It's negotiable by local officials.
What do you think happens with this backlash, right? It seems to be
really
growing
angry.
kind of by the day. It seems like every politician is going to be against data centers. Kevin O'Leary, you mentioned him. He was taken apart by Tucker Carlson in that fascinating interview.
Well, it's a bipartisan issue.
The backlash is broad across parties and now involves everybody, right?
Right.
And every politician is against data centers.
Well, they're not against them. I think the smart thing is to see, how can we do this in a way that, because it really does, because I really can't stand all their propaganda saying, oh, it's all Chinese people, Chinese government trying to stop this. It is
it's
in our
definitely not that.
It's
that's
not,
silly.
but we do need to compete in some fashion. We've abrogated a lot of our manufacturing elsewhere. We put it elsewhere, which is probably fine in the long run.
It's way better for regulating and managing AI if the data centers are here.
Right. So there's some argument to be made, but it's a big country. There's a lot of empty space.
There are
in the
lots of
United
places
States
to put
of
data
America.
centers. This is
right.
I feel like the AI industry, it would have been in the interest of everybody if there had been a less cavalier approach to where these data centers were put, and it had been a more
Well, they're
thoughtful approach.
cavalier about everything. They also go do all these massive interviews where they're like, your jobs are finished, and by the way, it's going to be easy for you because you're going to get free
So
money.
how much is that how much is the kind of dystopia's marketing? How much does that play into the fact that there's this backlash
It's
now?
both dystopia and over exuberance. Both the doomers, and the boomers are ridiculous. They're just ridiculous, both sides. It's going to solve everybody. It's going to wash my feet and comb my hair. I mean, like that's how they talk about it, as if it's great for me, when in fact the only one that seems to be benefiting is them.
I actually had my debate last night was whether AI would replace barbers with
Barbers,
my
right.
11-year-old
Well,
son, who was
maybe
arguing that maybe it
robotics.
could, and I was saying
Sure.
probably not. Manual dexterity is really
Maybe.
hard. The emotional connection.
Maybe someday. You don't say no to nothing. Like,
I was making the argument that it will probably replace baristas because you don't have such an intense
they
relationship.
have one of those in San Francisco
right?
airport.
But not
It's been
bartenders,
years.
because you
It's
have a
still
more
bad coffee.
complex emotional relationship to your bartender, and not
Possibly, yes.
barbers.
Those jobs. Well, I don't know. I don't think it's the first place people are going to go, because it's an really interesting discussion I had last year with Mark Cuban was about, and he was the first person. Now suddenly all these others are saying it with this token maxing problem.
Right.
He said, at some point tokens are more expensive than people, and then we'll go back to people. Like that's really the back and forth.
Well, the companies are starting to see that, right? And you're actually seeing this month, you're starting to see a little decrease in
if there's
token spend.
ROI to this thing. I do think, look, long term, we tend to underestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term,
Yeah.
overestimate in the short term. And I think a lot of this spending, it's so massive, there's not a clear winner. Reminds you a little bit of early internet, right? Like there were 20 companies and then there were 2. Now the 2 happen to be Google and Facebook, so that's great, right? Or, Microsoft reinvigorated. And so directionally, it's all the right it's where it's going.
When you were a reporter and you were, I think you started at the Washington Post, you went to Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
I remember reading your book on AOL. While you were doing that and getting your start as a tech journalist, I was working at Penguin Computing, Linux hardware, in San Francisco, in the bubble, right on Mission Street.
Where is that now?
Well, weirdly, because they never went public, they existed for a very long time. It has roughly the same valuation as it did in 1999. It was worth like $40 million, and then of course it went way up and then went back down.
Yeah. And so we were in that, but except at a quantum amplified level, because it's not tens of millions or close to a billion. Remember when a billion was a lot? It's now trillions. And so the spending, what you see is like, what was OpenAI? I forget what it was. It's 1.5 trillion or some number that they were going to be spending, or someone's putting 650 million into a company, which is insane.
Is there anybody of the top AI leaders, and you've dinged a couple of them,
Mm-hmm.
are there any that you think you underestimated who are actually up to the challenge of what we're about to face?
People can change. Look what happened at Microsoft under Satya Nadella. They really revived themselves. I mean, I don't think the jury's out on OpenAI the way it seems to be talk. I don't know, because they certainly.
In November, I think when my prep, I think in November you said you thought they were going to win.
No, I said they could be Netscape or they could be Google. I think that was where I was. I think
But you had a more optimistic feeling about them.
And then they managed to shoot themselves in the foot 26 times. Like they kept doing a lot of things. And then Sam did too many interviews. You've seen this with a lot of internet people too, early internet people. Just stop talking and start doing. And I think he faces more challenges now. I think Dario, and I think Scott got this right, was focused on the enterprise. And I think that was important for them. Now, I don't know. The question is, can they go public? It'll depend on a lot of things in the next. I wouldn't count OpenAI out at all. I just think that Dario seems to have come up through the middle. And then at the same time, he's beefing with other people, right? There's all these weird beefs between Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg just attacked them in the New York Times this week, not saying their names, which is really irritating.
Right.
But, there's all this sort of jockeying for power. And a lot of it is also present at the White House, which is trying to figure out which one to back. And there's all this sort of sharks and jets happening there. Mark Andreessen's hovering in the background somewhere. You have David Sachs, you have Emil Michael. You've got all these people that are, parts of teams that have nothing to do with the public interest, by the way. It has everything to do with their interest. No conflict, no interest, I think John Doerr famously said. It feels like that right now. And so I don't know. It depends if they go public. Do they get out? Can they find real revenue streams? Are corporations, like you just noted, going to pull back for a little bit to see where the ROI is? Who's going to be able to, right now, Oracle, for example, which is tight with OpenAI and some other companies, is doing a lot of investments because it's good for their business. There's a little bit of round tripping. Reminds me of AOL. I'll give you 20 if you give me 20 in this, and you buy the same 20 goes in a circle. You you look at something like Oracle, whose stock is down almost 40% in the year, or more. I think it's more than that over a year time period. Is that undervalued? Should they be making these investments?
Right.
Are the investments too much? And you saw Meta reported yesterday its stock got slammed for all the investments. And Mark was like, these are investments that are important for the future. You either believe in me or you don't. Same thing, Microsoft. The investments are massive. And so it's not clear who's going to win. The only thing I know is it's not going to be all of them. It's going to be two of them.
Right.
So.
But I don't mean so much who's going to win. It has been incredible to watch, right? Where in the fall it did seem OpenAI,
Right.
and oh my gosh, Gemini is, and
Gemini.
Now suddenly it's all Anthropic.
I did say Google is going to supplant Google. Like Google is, but that's because they were behind and then they rushed in there.
But who of the leaders and who of the companies do you think has the sort of the clearest moral understanding of the choices we need to make?
Anthropic. But it's a low bar. Let me just say it's a low bar. Anthropic does understand, I think, and is more. They were part of OpenAI and left because they were too fast and loose at OpenAI with the safety.
What do you think the government is going to do on the question of Chinese open source models?
I don't think they're going to do anything. I think they shouldn't, because there's also American open source models.
Right.
Look, just like Android versus Apple, it wasn't versus, it was Android and Apple. So there's going to be an Android type system in AI that is going to be open and people can borrow from it, like Linux or anything else. And then there's going to be an Apple, which will be a better version, probably a better, easier to use version that is a little nicer. But people who want to use Android, use Android. I think there has to be open source. If we cannot clamp down on open source models, even if they're from China. And the opportunity is for there to be American open source models. It doesn't have to just be China. It's just that they can really cut the prices. But the price differential, people will decide which one they want to use.
It is remarkable that the leaders in open source are both China and Meta, which is not how I would have predicted.
There's going to be a Linux of this. There's going to be, and I do think it's critical that there be open source models so people have choices. Actually, of all people, Alex Karp had a very cogent explanation of this, obviously loaded with self-interest.
In that long CNBC interview?
Yes, where he was kooky for part of it. He suddenly decides to talk about diversity. I really want him to stop talking about diversity.
It was an extraordinary interview, though.
Yeah.
His point about how data is flowing up into the models and what you have to protect. And
Correct.
What we have to get to next,
I completely.
Which is something we know in media, because all of our data flowed up into the models, and they've now created competitive products to us.
Correct.
That's at a different scale, when it's not just your written words, it's actually your
thought
business
processes.
Model,
and it's your business model, it's your information. I would agree with him. When in that word salad of his, I was like, okay, can we, it was sort of like the weeds, and there was like a good flower in there, and that was good. And I think his idea that open source was going to be very, they seem to think that it has to be either open source or these, and I don't think.
Well, unless open source reaches one of the, there are advantages to your iPhone over the Android phones. There are things you like about other community elements, right? So some people choose it, and then the majority
I don't
choose
know.
Android.
Apple's the most valuable company in the world right now, so I think it's just okay for there to be Apples and there to be Androids.
Right, but I mean that if the open source models become identical, right, to the frontier models, and the frontier models are expensive,
they'll have to provide a better.
I agree with you, but I don't think it's impossible that the
no.
open
But
source models
if there's a better level, if you have an Apple-like product, people will go to it. I think there's a certain customer for that, and there's a certain customer for the open source model.
Let's talk a little bit about social media, which is obviously someplace where you've made a lot of noise over the years. Where also you're quite a prolific poster. You're a wonderful poster. I particularly enjoy your Threads commentary. My view, and I think your view, is that social media in the last 10 years drove people apart, it drove people into filter bubbles, drove people to extremes. It seems possible that social media of the future with AI in the middle could do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at how their politics change when they spend more time with AI, they tend to move towards the center as opposed to moving to the extreme.
It's very anodyne, yeah.
And you can imagine some kind of AI implemented inside of a social platform. You could do it in Threads, you could do it in Blue Sky, you could be in a new platform that actually makes the communication in democracy work better. Is that going to happen?
I don't know. I think look, the reason I use Threads is because it's the way Twitter used to be, right? You get some back and forth, but I find it useful. I think everything you make in social media, if it's useful, I use it.
Yeah.
The minute it stops being useful, I'll stop using it, or it starts to get abusive, which is what happened with Twitter as Elon took it over. I find it useful as a news discovery service, and somehow the algorithm is giving me what I want, like information, interesting. I find
You
it
a decent flow of Atlantic articles, which I
yes, it
appreciate.
does. I do well because I asked for them, I pulled from them, but it also gives me fresh stuff, which
Yeah.
you don't just want. You don't want to get what you always get. You
Yeah.
want to kind of get, and so I find it really useful. I find it useful. I find it enjoyable. I find it entertaining. That would be great. And I think if you use it as that, I think these sort of dunking models and everything else, and we didn't talk about young people in AI, which is a really interesting polling. They feel the same way about social media. I think social media is going to have a real hard time holding on to young people in the future. I think
because they're so opposed to
it's useless to them. It's useless. It doesn't make them feel better. It doesn't. I think this is a phenomena of people 30 to 50. And I think younger people are using social media less and less. I think you're starting to see minutes of that.
Oh, totally. They're definitely. I mean, they are using Snapchat stories and Instagram, but they're using it in different ways.
Different ways. You know what they're using? YouTube is television.
Yeah, YouTube is television, and Instagram to like communicate with their friends.
Right, exactly. Instagram or Snapchat. That's fine. I just think it goes in so many directions that this idea of an overwhelming company is less and less. So
I had a really interesting conversation with my eldest son, who's 18, last night in the car ride. And we had a 9-hour car ride up here in Maine, and we were talking about AI, and he said that he was very grateful that he had enough years in his high school education where he got to actually do library research and learn how to do it. And so then I was asking him, I said, so why is it, the backlash among young people? Is it because of the environmental consequences? Is it because of the fear about jobs in the future? Is it because you feel like your education is being stolen? And he said, those things all play a little part, but it's really just because the companies suck.
The companies suck.
It's like it was very stark from a kid who's not anti-capitalist, who's not.
Right. My sons are the same way. My older sons, I have one who's 24 and 21, and they're like, they just suck, and I don't want to give them my stuff. They're very, it's kind of like, I'm a little older than you are, but TV used to be the boob tube, and now it's brilliant. TV is brilliant. Like whatever show you go to, whether it's Widow's Bay or Severance, or like there's so much good stuff on television, and it was not like that. Like it just wasn't, and people made fun of it. I think a lot of young people look at social media and the use is like that. They're like, this is stupid. This is stupid. My son said, he took all the social media apps off his phone, and I said, I just was like, why'd you do that? And he goes, it just makes me feel bad. I don't like it.
And it's an interesting difference. Like, so for me, and I think for you, right? Like, I love these companies in a certain way, and I want to change the companies, and I want to use like the little bit of influence in the media.
I love them less than you do now.
Right. Well, I love them less than I used to as well, but I think maybe my love has decreased less than yours.
Yes, that's true.
But I also the question I asked you, like, I would love at some point to see someone try to change the algorithm of a major social media platform to increase discussion, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a possibility, and I think that's interesting, and I think I get excited by that prospect. I think for young people, they just sort of have written the companies off in some ways as positive moral actors.
Well, because look at them. They're ridiculous. Go look how much Elon is online. It's nuts.
Yeah, well, the only way to use Twitter is to block Elon and to mute
I get
the
it,
word
but
Musk.
look how much he's online. It's crazy. And then he spends his time yelling at a movie people like. Like, don't watch the movie. Leave people alone. I think a lot of people look at someone like that and they're like, thanks for the rockets, but get the hell out of here, kind of thing. Same thing, or Bezos, like pontificating about them. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen to these people. They're not heroes. They're not like, wow, what an amazing thing. And they are doing more things in person.
Yeah.
Both my kids are very much doing, one of my sons has started going to church a lot, which he loves. He loves the community of it. My other son works in a restaurant, goes out with his friends. And a lot of these kids, of course, were unfortunate victims of COVID during that period when they were in 9th to 12th grade, essentially, or beginning of college. And they are sort of shunning that for more community event. You do see it, and that's kind of people going back to the movies.
They're running marathons too, and they're part of these incredible run clubs.
And they're going
wild.
Yes, and they're going back to the movies, kind of things. And it's not just because they're making. Really interesting. All Hollywood. Oh my goodness! Look at Backrooms and Obsessions. Well, if my son told me about that Backrooms guy years ago, like he was following those people and then of course it was going to be popular because they made a movie of a thing he liked on YouTube. So
Do you think the U.S. will follow Australia and ban social media for kids under 16?
no, but everybody
You think
else
they
will.
should?
I think there's no other choice at this point because these companies what I think is Facebook should finally agree to stop giving its products to people under 16.
Facebook should just do it voluntarily.
They
Say we're
should
cutting
do it,
everybody
and they
off.
should do it in a strong way and not in this beef with Apple and Google way. None of this nonsense that they're pulling, these sort of watered down COSA or something like that, which is what they try to do, sort of a nothing burger of a thing. They should say, we're not going to sell our product to people under 16 anymore, and we are going to make sure they're not on it. And if we're not, we were willing to be fined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that social media did is it took power from institutions and moved it to individuals.
Especially
right?
publications. Yeah.
Certainly happened in publications. We're interested. We're on
Yeah.
opposite sides here, right? Because I need to make sure all the Atlantic writers stay at the Atlantic, and you're a model of how somebody can move off and be successful.
Yes.
So explain how you think AI is going to change that calculus.
It's interesting because I was one of the first people to do this, right? To leave the Wall Street Journal with Walt and do this and create a multi revenue stream business. We did the conference, which made a lot of money. The website did not make as much money, but then I moved into podcasting, which did.
So you've done it a couple of times.
I have. I do.
Is great.
It's good. It pleases me, and I'm actually have some new ideas next. So
And you're always like when Kevin Roos is leaving. Oh, well, I talked to Kara, right? You're always
Yeah.
you're kind of there when
no,
everybody
I'm
leaves.
there every time. It was so funny when the New York Times wrote this very kind piece about me. It was sort of a big wet kiss of a piece, but it's fine. They said, "We hear you're making a lot of money from career consulting." I'm like, "No, I'm not making any money, and I should because I have so many lunches where I have lunches or breakfast with people asking advice, and a lot of them is what you're talking about. Should I go out on my own?" They see. And it's from surprising people. They see, look, the money you could make if you do it yourself, the IP that you keep, and things like that. And to me, some people are good at it and some people are not.
So, okay, tell me about, we hear the stories about the people where it's successful. Oh, Matt Iglesias is making
Yeah.
$1 billion a year, right?
He's not.
Well, okay, whatever.
okay.
But I know he's not making $1 billion.
Okay.
But you read about people like that who are extremely successful at it and
Yeah.
do very well and,
Yeah.
and are very good
Yeah.
at it. Who are the people where it doesn't work?
Anyone who's more interested in the money, when they're thinking I should get more money, that's not why you should do
Yeah.
it, right? I think that money comes with it if you do it right. And so I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. If you're going at it for something else, freedom, the ability to sort of get unshackled. I think a lot of people feel that
Yeah.
way, not being told what to do. Sometimes a firing happens, right? Sometimes like Don, it was a firing. He got
Yeah.
fired. It was a great thing to happen to him because he got extra money when he left because he got the contract. So he had some cushion money and then he could build what he's building, which I think is really interesting. Or Megyn Kelly came to me when she got fired and we talked about podcasting. And she's gone in a direction I don't like, but Godspeed. And I talked to them all. The people, one person came to me and I thought he didn't have entrepreneurial abilities.
Yeah.
Like in terms of being flexible, I think he didn't understand how much he was supported by the institution. I thought the institution was a good one for him for what
Yeah.
he was doing. And what he was selling was not what I thought he could make money at. Like I don't think they have an awareness of advertising. Like the topics were not things that were going to get ads and unlikely to get that many subscriptions. And a lot of these things do have a ceiling, right? Ultimately. And you have a ceiling of audience. And sometimes that's great if you have cost structure. The other thing, he wasn't particularly business oriented. He had no idea about business.
Right.
And if you don't, you really can't do this. If you don't understand advertising, if you don't understand you need help. He needed help.
Cost
and
per acquisition growth.
so-
Like all these things that are so
yes,
important.
exactly. And I said, you know what? You really need to stay. Where you are is actually good for
Okay,
what
so this
you're
gets
doing.
to AI in an interesting way.
Yeah.
So I could make an argument that it's going to be much easier for individual creators to leave their institutions because some of that infrastructure can be taken care of. You
It
can
can.
learn about cost per acquisition
y-
with Claude,
yes.
and you can set up a program
Yes.
that does a lot of it.
Yes.
On the other hand, I could argue it's going to get harder because I think the creator economy is going to get really weird with digital creators and
Right.
things are going to be thrown up in the air. And I do think there's going to be a flight to high quality brands, right?
Correct.
And
that is correct. I agree with
in
you.
a chaotic information ecosystem that we're going to have in 3 years, actually a place like the Atlantic or the New York Times or Vox will be in a better situation because of the brand and the long trust. So an individual has both an advantage in 3 years, an individual will have an advantage they don't have right now and a disadvantage.
Possibly. Now, look, Vox is different than the Atlantic. You guys really do. Vox now is basically, here's what they're my partner. They sell my ads for me. I own the IP. They have the production people. I don't want to employ people. And so that's worth it to me. Now, Scott has his own people. So he has a slightly different, the costs don't come out because he pays the cost. So they're just the ad people for him. He just sells their ads. They're really good at it. That's a different relationship than us deciding together what to make. I decide what I want to make, and then I go to Vox and say, do you want to partner with me on this? Whether we do subscription, a live event, like the Pivot Tour, we do together. But they are our facilitators versus our editors, if that makes sense.
So that makes sense. But do you think that AI will make it easier or harder?
When I ran when I ran the Recode, and we're about to do it actually, because a lot of the Recode people are now at really cool places all over the place because they were sort of entrepreneurial journalists way back when. I remember thinking as I was running the business how I took my eye off the ball of content, right? And so I was spending a lot of time on HR, and I hated it. I was okay at it. I wasn't terrible at it, but it certainly was a waste of my time because I could have been making things, right? And so I think that's the difficulty. So there may be these. I mean, I think if you do it right, and I just had this conversation with someone from a big newspaper. I was like, because people are leaving there. And I was like, they're going to keep leaving because they're calling. I'm telling you, all your people are calling me because they want a way out. And the reason they want a way out is because you're not sharing in the bounty with them. And you have to figure out a way to reward some people who are making things that are creating revenue, even if you don't reward everybody. It's a really big problem because some people will make products that will be great, but you can't just keep it all for yourself.
Right.
Because they can add, like you said, they're rational things they can add. And if you're making, I think the New York Times is making $50 million off of the Daily. Is Michael Barber getting 30 million of it? I doubt it, right? Why not? Could they replace them? There's all this interesting dynamics there, but you've got to just decide that talent is important enough to be part of, just like Silicon Valley does. Yeah. All your employees get a piece of the action. In media, for some reason, that's what was long and no way do they get because they're here at the Atlantic or they're here at the New York Times. And you have to start to figure out new systems depending on the talent.
I don't know if this is a question for Michael Barbaro, right?
Right.
At the New York Times. I know nothing about his situation. But you can imagine them saying, oh, wait, if we pay Michael 2x, suddenly we're going to have to raise 1,000 people by a certain percentage.
That's the problem. That is the big problem. So what are you?
So then what do you do? So then how do you keep a Michael, right? And so we went through this in an interesting way at the Atlantic where when I started, it was very clear that Substack was trying to pull a lot of our people. And for good reason. Our people are good people, and Substack has good taste.
They have been to visit me.
So we then created a program where we said, okay, let's try to find something in the middle. And we'll create a program for newsletter writers where we pay them a salary. So we de-risk it, right? We'll give them upside. So if they drive a subscription, they won't get the whole, but they'll get
a piece
of it. And then we'll give them some editing and some legal support. So the theory was, we'll give them part of what you get from the Atlantic.
Right.
But you also will get independence and upside.
Right.
And we ran the program and it was fine, but it ended up neither here nor there. It turned out to be great because some of the people who came in ended up as Atlantic, staff writers. And so we brought in interesting people, but the interesting program died. And I sometimes wonder whether
maybe it was too early.
Might have been too early, or we might have gotten some of the variables wrong.
Or you may have a bunch of staff writers and you may have a bunch of creators you work with, right? That you give services to, right? To me, the way I look at Vox, and I really, because they love journalism and they also like entrepreneurs. They're not, now initially.
Yeah, when Bankoff comes from that world,
didn't
he
like
loves
it.
them.
Yeah, but he also didn't like it. We're we'll be taking 70% now. He was like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's what we're going to be. Oh, fine, we'll go over there. It does, you're sort of like an athlete, that can go from team to team. It's a little more like that, where you're part of a team and yet you also have an independence. And I think.
Okay, so there's an interesting thing then for management, right? So if the management is deciding, right, okay, are we going to bring in Kara or we're going to bring in this other big name person? And wait, suddenly there's a risk that if it is very successful, she's just going to leave somewhere else.
That's right.
So then you lose some of the upside because you take the risk in the beginning where
Right.
you're paying Kara more than she's making but if it's like with athletes, right? You kind of lock them
Yeah.
into long-term
Right.
contracts.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of a tricky dynamic once it's clear that there's total mobility out of there, which is, of course, also a good thing for the writers, journalists, or athletes.
Right. But if you give them services that are enough, I never liked guarantees.
Yeah.
I didn't, because it says to your partner, I don't believe you can do this, right?
Right.
And when Scott and I went off, it was really interesting. We talked to one group of people who didn't have much of like Vox had an amazing ad team and everything else. They had the system going,
Yeah.
so it was good. Plus, we wanted to own the Pivot IP, which we got in that deal. But we would have had to change the name and everything else, call it something else, Divot, whatever. And one of the things I was thinking is, I'm going to get a guarantee from you, this other company, because I don't know if you could make me the money. And I don't trust you. I trusted Vox because I knew they did it.
Right.
And so guarantees create a really problem. It never aligns. Like when we do a Pivot live thing, like we both are on the hook for it, Like if it does well, we both do well. If it doesn't, we both don't. And so I think that's better. But a lot of times these guarantees kind of mess up the incentive.
There's another interesting dynamic I was just thinking about while you were talking, and again, I've never talked to Bankoff about your negotiations, but you upset advertisers sometimes, right?
We do, just this week.
Called Meta Jeffrey Dahmer, right?
I didn't. That was Scott.
But your partner did.
Yes, he did. And they blamed me. Yeah.
But because you're thought of not as Vox, you're thought of as Scott and Kara, it's not going to affect whether Meta advertises on The Verge, right?
No, not at all.
Right?
No. Why should it?
Right. But if you weren't thought of if you thought of as Scott and Kara, but you were thought of as a Vox podcast, then actually it could affect advertisements on The Verge, right?
Could. Yeah, could.
So there's a whole other complexity when Bankoff is thinking through this, like, both the upside and the downside of having individual brands who are kind of bigger than the house brand.
Right. But that's not unlike, television with producers and TV shows, right? Or stars like it's a little more like Hollywood or sports now than it used to be. It used to be, studios used to be, you worked like MGM, you were all work for them and you made 16 movies a year, whatever it happened to be. It's now much more of a production company situation, right? Where like I'm thinking of for my next book, I'm going to do a podcast with it and I have a great idea for it. I'll probably do it with Vox, but I will think about where I will do. Like, where should I do this? Who can get me the best thing? Should I do it myself? Same thing with this longevity series. I just did it. If I want to do a podcast with it, I did a little bit of it with Vox when I did it. But if I was doing something else, where would I do that? Like now YouTube is now buying up things. They're a new buyer, which is interesting. And Netflix is now a buyer. And they're not going to buy Karen Scott because we're too controversial. But that's interesting. If you're
Certainly not going to buy you before 2028.
They were like, when I went on Brian Williams' show recently, which is on Netflix, and they were like, Kara Swisher, really? Like, they were, it's too spicy for them kind of thing.
So let me explain how I think about this creative versus institutional dynamic at The Atlantic and how I'm planning for it, and then you tell me what's wrong. Okay. So we have all these writers, and in fact, we're a writers collective.
You are.
It's part of what we are, right? And we're not like the Economist where we take away their names or the Wall Street Journal where we give them all the same picture. Like we really promote our individual writers. We get our individual writers on show.
You have stars. You have a lot of stars.
We have a lot of stars, and we think that's good for us, and we like our stars to disagree, right? So we start from a position where we're going to be very vulnerable to Substacks and to our most talented entrepreneurial people even. So my job is to make the institution as strong as possible, that we convey, this isn't a choice, but the fact that we're doing well, and it's in the press that we're doing well, and that we're making much more money than we did last year, more than the year before, right? That is helpful because they know there's not going to be
stability,
some kind of a financial calamity, right? Keep as many people as we can by making the institution as strong as possible and having them feel as comfortable and as welcome as possible.
Right, but you may have to see. I think some people were woefully underpaid at these institutions, and some were overpaid. Right? I don't know why everyone was paid the same. Like, even when I was a young reporter, I was breaking story after story, at the Washington Post and then at the Wall Street Journal, breaking stories, like scoop, scoop, scoop. I was like, why did I get paid less? I was better. And I remember saying this and they're like, well, we have a pay scale. I'm like, why? I'm better than they are. Like it didn't make any sense to me at the time, even at that time. And so I think, and they were like, that's the way we do it. I'm like,
Right.
really hate those words. Like, why do you do it this way? And so at some point you may have to have different relationships with different people. There was one point I remember the Journal, they decided to hire someone who's going to help take people's stories and make them into movies. Remember every publisher had that division, and then it kind of collapsed on itself. Like, who owns the story? The New York Magazine or Atlantic or the writer who found it, right? And so there's got to be a new relationship.
Or the editor who gave it to the
Or the
writer.
editor gave it to the writer, right? Like, where is the value creation? At some point, it's pretty obvious where.
Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's really hard, right?
Correct.
Because sometimes the editor talks to the editor-in-chief, the editor has an idea, they give it to the writer then transforms it into something that then becomes a movie, which then the company then sells.
Where does the value chain is? And so that does become clear over time. Like, in my case, I was like, I've had hit after hit after hit. Therefore, it's me. Like, you know what I mean? Or it's Walt and I, or Scott and I, or whatever. And so that's more clear. But I think the difficulty is how do you share in the rewards? And that's why I got inspired a little by Silicon Valley. You get stock how good you are, right? That's how you get paid, by your value. And they seem to know your value at tech companies. And for some reason, media companies never know the value of editors know. Everyone knows, but they never pay based on value. And you can ascribe, let me give you one example. When I was at CNN, I was talking to a couple of people who were in their negotiations, and I forget, these anchors make $7-8 million. Some of them, that's the low end, right? Or $2 to $20 million, essentially. And I just said, are you making $7 million in advertising money? Because it has to be that plus your staff, which looks like it's $4 million. And then they kind of have to double it.
Yeah.
So are you worth $20 million? I don't think you are. So you're not going to get signed again. Like, it just, and so to me, you have to sort of figure out where your economic value is as a writer. And then you have to figure out that.
And it's pretty hard, right? Because I can go and I could build a model, and I could take every writer at the Atlantic and I could say, okay, how many page views did you get? How many subscribers did you bring in? How many stories did you write? And you can attach numbers to all those things, affiliate revenue, the Hollywood stuff. You can build that model, right? Mm-hmm. But then you have the second question of, okay, now is that really the value that accrues to the Atlantic? Because a story that generates a bunch of subscriptions, but that makes the brand, is neutral to the brand, versus a story that really doesn't have many readers, but like the folks who read it, like they love the Atlantic because of that story.
Right. But I do think you have to think about it, because every dollar we make, I know what part I made. I do. You do, when you're in a situation.
Well, that's the nice thing about being creators. You really do have total control.
I really know if I didn't make money or I did, and I know if something we did, like suddenly there's $5 million and it was because of an idea I had, like, guess what? You're lucky you're getting 30. Like, you know what I mean? Because on some level, I'm a little lazy. I don't want to do the staffing. I don't want, like, Scott has a deal on Prof G where he has his own staff and he keeps more, right? Because he wants to do. I don't have any interest in that because I'm old and I don't want to manage people anymore. Right. So I'm paying for like having a nice lawyer or whatever, like a cleaning lady, whatever you want to call it. Jim Bankoff is not a cleaning lady. You know what I mean? Like and he does the services beautifully and he's worth every penny of it. And both of us benefit. And it's going to be very hard because there's fewer of people like me or a Casey Newton or an Oliver Darcy or Jim McCaw. There's fewer of those, but you are going to have to figure out ways to attract them because that's where some of your bigger money is.
I mean, there will be, like, and again, Jeff Goldberg runs the editorial side. He makes the decisions on who to hire. I don't have any idea who he's talking to right now. I don't even know when he pays most of these people. Right. All I can do is sort of set the institution up as best I can.
He should be paid more, just so you know.
Jeff, you don't even know what Jeff's paid, right?
I don't care. He should be paid more.
He is a wonderful
He's a
editor.
singular sensation.
He's a dear friend, and we work very well together, and the Atlantic is fortunate for that. But he should, and he is, be looking for people who aren't going to be with us for 30 years, but will come to us not as stars and leave us as stars.
Maybe it's a different world where you don't.
Maybe it's a different world where it's fine, right?
Yeah.
And they can go.
And this is why I like Vox, because Jim is not like that. He's like, he's signed some really great deals lately because people feel they can make something, benefit financially, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then you move on. Like that's the part that's hard for journalists is if it doesn't work, you gotta move. Like that's a hard thing. Journalists are so risk averse. Like someone was like, "Why'd you stop doing it?" I'm like, "Oh, it didn't work."
Well, we're risk averse, and it's The psychology of being in an industry that has been going down for a decade financially is very different from the psychology of an industry that's been going up for a decade.
But it doesn't have to, because people have never been more interested in content.
Oh, totally. That's why I said at the very beginning, like, it is an amazing time to be a journalist. I love using AI for journalism. I love like trying to manage a legacy brand at this moment of total chaos. Like, that's exciting. It's energizing. Life is never boring. But the psychology in an industry where you look around and you're like, oh my God, wait, how many people now work at the Washington Post? Like, wait, what happened?
Well, that was a self-inflicted gunflow,
Right, but there are other places that, haven't shot themselves in the foot the way the Post did, but have had similar economic woes.
Right. But I will tell you, I don't get very many calls from Atlantic people at all. It's all from major newspapers and definitely cable networks and broadcast networks. That's where I get all the calls.
Anybody wants to call Kara
I just want to
Swisher,
say
her phone number is 207.
No, I don't, because I think you probably do a better job, but you are still going to have to continue to think of innovative ways to reward the people who have great ideas and then create revenue from those great ideas, right? Or something. It doesn't have to be money. It has to be something of value.
Right.
And you know what that is.
And then you also have to figure out, okay, where are you spending that's not getting you value, so that you're not, and reduce that so that you're not just increasing costs.
Right, absolutely. But like, look, the Jeffrey Goldberg Signal thing, I bet you didn't make much cash on that, but boy, is that important to the Atlantic, right? But you didn't make it in the traditional way, like an ad person, like, great, I want to be right next to this story.
Yeah,
the
Yemenis were not buying a lot of ads in the
But
pages there.
guess what? You made a lot of money.
Well, I mean, most of our business, of course, is subscriptions, and we did generate a lot of subscriptions
from that. And so, how do you then anyway? It's you have to be
Kara, one question we ask all our guests: if you had an unlimited budget and could spend it on anything in AI, what would you do?
In AI or just in general?
In AI.
Oh,
it's the most interesting thing in AI. It's not
local. Something with local. I would start really investing in different things locally, and there's a lot you could do around AI and local.
I think it's extremely important that the benefits get dispersed and don't just
not just that. I think you can make some bank.
Come up with some new ideas.
Some new ideas of how to serve people information locally, and AI would be a critical part of it.
Kara Swisher, it's been fantastic to have you here on The Most Interesting Thing in AI. This has been The Most Interesting Thing in AI. I'm Nicholas Thompson, and that was Kara Swisher. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel for more. Thank you for watching.